Dr. Bailey is, don't know how to, the comment about the age span and how the typical 3 to 18 doesn't fit our kids is just so absolutely true. And, you know, in BC, you can argue for an additional year at school. In Manitoba, you can get 3 additional years. And, you know, in California, our consultants from California, they have an automatic 4-year post-secondary for their kids. So they're guaranteed education age 3 to 22. And we really need to be looking at those options. Having said that, also Michelle's comment about before, is there needs to be some accountability for what happens in that kind of school. So.
I think there was a concern when the government was thinking about this full-day kindergarten and other sorts of initiatives for bringing kids into the system really early, that when you have a child with a disability, it's easy to say, oh yeah, let's bring the kids in early, but some of the kids will not have been diagnosed or will have issues that need to be dealt with, and if if you're bringing them into the system, then you better know what to do with them. So I think that part of that sort of idea, I think it's a good one, but needs to be training, needs to be understanding around children who are coming in early and who may have issues early on, and then how do you address those? And later on, as adults are getting older, what are some of the issues they'd be facing that the schools are not used to dealing with, right? But yeah.
I was just thinking about a lot of that same sort of thing. From my perspective, as someone who does intervention, not as a parent, although actually it was true as a parent too, the community needs to be better supported. Like, we're talking about all these initiatives and saying, let's provide this for your kids, let's provide that for your kids. But justifiably, in some respect, the community professionals that are saying, no, I won't do it, probably should say, no, I won't do it, because they don't have adequate training. So there's that wishy-washy area where people are being asked to do things, and they're saying, oh, I really want to rise to the challenge, but there's not enough money or whatever there is, not enough support for people to take time off work to get training or whatever it is. And so you get these people that are terrified, they're absolutely horrified when they find out they've got these kids coming into their classrooms. They can't say no, right? Because, well, it's unethical, but it's actually unethical to take them without the training. And I had this sort of, as a side comment, I play racquetball and squash and whatever, and I was in the change room one day, and this woman said to me out of the blue, what do you do? I said, I work with kids with autism. Oh, I have one of those in my classroom. I said, oh, well, how's that going? Oh, I don't know, you'd have to ask his aide. Standard, so, and I've been to IEPs where the teachers don't know what the child's working on because that's not their job. So, and again, I'm almost more respectful for the teacher that comes right out and says, I don't know what he's doing because I don't have the training, than the teacher that pretends they're involved and isn't. And so it's that really ethical mismatch of training, and these workshops that everyone goes to, including myself, are frequently inadequate. I mean, they're great to inspire you, but they're not great for training. So to say, well, I went to a 2-day workshop on ABA or XYZ or whatever it was you took, hardly makes you an expert on it. So, I mean, the money really needs to be invested in the top line as well as in the kids. So how do you figure that one out?
We have a number of questions actually that were sent in by email, but does anybody have another comment or before we go to some of these? We'll come back.
Okay, many of the questions are really consistent, which is interesting. People think alike on these issues. So I'm trying to find one here that hasn't been... Oh yes, so probably something that's been touched on but not really addressed in great detail is the issue of these sorts of life skills training, as well as employment skills training and social skills training, which all go together. but that families are finding really hard to access, and whether or not they actually exist out there, and do people know, what are there really good, life skills programs, employment skills programs, social skills programs that families can access.
I can talk a little bit about what I know about some of the supports and services that are available within CLBC. And it's absolutely true that I think by the time individual workers are working in individuals' homes, we may see some difference around that. Carol made a comment earlier about the need for standards in relation to some of these things. I am seriously getting that echo now. You guys hear that, right? Hopefully that'll be a bit better. Perhaps not. Do we have the tech person here? Oh dear.
Move around a little bit.
Okay, I'll hold it closer. All right. See, we have technically, competent people, unlike me, so thank you. So, with the types of supports and services that CLBC funds, we do offer some employment supports. We've known for a long time that with appropriate and good fit supports, people can do really well in employment, and that's across the range of people that we serve. In the last few years, we've had a huge focus on employment in our organization, and we do have a community action employment plan, and we have a few pilot sites across the province where we have some pilot projects that are getting off the ground that are really taking into consideration the multiple concerns that have been identified in terms of, do the workers who are hired by the employment agency have the skills that they need to be successful in working as a job coach? And one of the other critical components around the employment is having knowledge of the community, so knowing employers to work with. And we know that when there's too many different places going and knocking on the doors of employers saying, we have some people who we'd like to have employment experience for, or looking for work, that we can end up watering down some of the work. So there needs to be coordinated efforts around that, and we're looking at that within our area. There's also employment supports through Work BC, and they've had an interest in ensuring that they are more able to respond to a broad range of people, so they've been working on improvements around that as well. And when it comes to life skills and, did you say social skills? Within CLBC, we talk about skills development, and they both really are addressed under the same area, because for the most part, those are delivered by our service providers who have standards within their own agencies, and most of the agencies have comparable standards. We don't have them at a provincial level, but if people are experiencing challenges like Carol commented on, there are lots of ways of addressing that, either with the agency directly, or if people aren't successful with that, we do have processes at CLBC to help people who are not satisfied with their services to improve those, either working with our local managers to address the challenges and concerns, or when things are really going sideways, we do have a provincial complaints process that will allow families to directly work with our quality assurance department to address the underlying issues. And we have seen, we've implemented changes in that in the last couple of years because we weren't getting the success that we had hoped for, and we've learned from different things that people have experienced with that, and we do have a really clear process now to make sure we're following up with families who have concerns and complaints about those things. But the first thing usually is to go back to the agency that you're working with if you're not getting what you need, if you have funded services in place. More broadly, I think your question also was around being able to access those services, and as I said, there are some work supports through Ministry of Social Development and Social Innovation, and I'm not sure when it comes to social skills and life skills development what the opportunities are in childhood or youth anymore. I wonder if someone else on the panel can speak to that.
Sorry, back to me again. So in terms of children and youth, there's a few different groups out there, probably most people are familiar with, but in case you're not, the Friend-to-Friend group, which is a demystification program. There's the We Can Be Friends, which is part of the Canucks Autism Network program. There is also, with the Ministry for Child and Family Development, a New Friends program, and then the titles are different depending on the age group. So the one I was looking at was BC Fun Friends, which is, I believe, in that sort of early elementary, and then there's another group for the older group as well. And that's not specifically for autism. I actually pulled it up here. It's for anxiety prevention and resiliency. So, but they do have a lot of work in terms of, different needs and different skills and abilities. And then finally, different consultants will often have programs, so social skills programs. So consulting with each consultant and saying, contacting people on the RASP and saying, are you running, social skills programs? We, for example, run 2 programs. We run a carpet club program, which is for kids in that sort of 4-year-old range to prepare them for kindergarten. And then we have a West Side Kids Club, which is for boys, which started at ages 4 and 5. They're now ages 11 and 12. That's how long they've been together. This is not an inclusion program, so I get my hand slapped for this. This is a segregated program with 4 young boys who have autism. And it has been phenomenally successful. So the kids are super motivated. They actually will go through school all day just to go to kids clubs. So, there's a little bit of everything out there, and that's pretty much what I know about children.
This isn't something I know a whole lot about, but I looked into it with a friend of mine for her son that I know Cap College and Kwantlen for sure have training programs for employment where individuals can apply. There is an interview process. It's more of an assessment process, and there are spaces, and they will teach job skills and do a work placement. And there's, I think the CAP program, I believe, there's also 2 levels of the program where you could actually take one and then take the next program, but it is designed for individuals who need more than a low level of support. And I know when I looked into it, it's also for people who maybe can only read, say, at a grade 1 level, and do, so it's also looking for individuals that need more assistance.
Again, please send us all that information that we can put on our resource page for other families to, yeah, and Sarah's taking notes back there. Any other questions before? Okay. Another really concerning issue for families, which isn't often talked about, is transitioning physically to sexuality and in young individuals with ASD, either female or male, who physically are mature, yet socially maybe don't have the skills to figure out what to do with those feelings, and what is out there for those individuals, and how can we better use that time in their life, or sort of be more proactive about dealing with those issues. Silence.
It's great to be associated with sex.
So, when I was in the UK, I was the trustee of a residential boarding school for kids with ASD. So these were some of the most hard to manage kids in the UK. And the issue of sexuality came up, so of course they struck a committee. It's the only way to deal with these things. And they had a rather mixed way of dealing with it, which involved cartoons that were so graphic that even I blushed. And so it's an area that people don't really want to talk about very much for usual reasons, but actually causes my adult patients a lot of distress. So when I see an able male with ASD, usually the things they want are a girlfriend, a job, a car, and a house, and it's usually in that order. And I always take the route with them that you usually have to have a job and sometimes a car in order to get a girlfriend. In other words, that for the rest of us, the sort of sequence of prerequisites, if you want, a relationship as opposed to casual sex. And so I think it's helpful to put sex in the context of relationships, because then in a sense you slow the process down slightly, but you link it to other things that the rest of the world are interested in. The men are less vulnerable to abuse than the women. So I have had a number of young women over the years who will say things that make my blood run cold in terms of knowing that they want to have a boyfriend, but they've figured out the easiest way to have a boyfriend is to have sex first, which sort of guarantees them never having a long-term relationship. And so I think the onus on professionals and parents is always protection first, and then thinking out how can one enable the person to be in an environment where they will meet people who are not going to exploit them and might be suitable candidates for a long-term relationship. And I think that's the tricky issue, is to shift the debate away from sex more into enabling people to have relationships. I've had quite a number of patients who got married and have married a wide variety of different people, and they're the happiest ones because they're in a long-term committed relationship. And so I think one wants to shift the focus slightly away from sort of instant gratification to longer-term relationships.
I'm just going to steal this for a second, being that I have a 19-year-old boy who has his girlfriend visiting from Seattle this weekend. And I agree wholeheartedly that the focus should be on job first, then car, then girlfriend. And I've been preaching that for probably the last 5 years. Because I know his focus, once his focus goes somewhere, that will be where his focus will be. And if he doesn't have the other supports for himself, i.e. the job and the car, then the other won't work. Very good point on trying to deflect the focus. Zach actually met his girlfriend online in a chat room, and they developed this, they have this, they develop these stories, and they do this alternate universe kind of thing, and a number of the people that are involved, it was Autism and Asperger's chat room that was started with, so a number of the people that are involved in on the chat room are on the spectrum. And they've been working for developing this alternate universe for years that they actually call Aspergia. And the people that are there are, you know, whether they star people or what, like the story development is phenomenal. And that's how I know that Emily and Zach had started as friends. And it's developed, and she's been up to visit a couple of times from Seattle. He's gone down there once to visit, and the friends are, Emily's parents have also been up, and we met and stayed the weekend with us at one point when Zach and Emily were getting much closer in their friendship. And it is a friendship first, more than it is anything else. And I know that's worked really, really well with Zach. It's the relationship more than the sexual aspect of it at this point. He hasn't quite bridged that yet. And whatever we can do to support that, I don't know. He's got the house by himself this afternoon, so he's on his own there. But what his key focus is, the relationship, it's the friendship. It's that friendship that maybe he didn't have the opportunity to develop while I was at high school. And someone who understands him for who he is, and he can support as well. So it's a start.
I guess I wanted to comment on sexuality being more than just sex. Again, autism is a spectrum, and for individuals who are on the lower end of this spectrum, a sexual relationship or relationships may not be something that's part of their future, but they're still going to go through puberty, they're still going to have that raging hormones, and just creating in parents an awareness of what might happen. You can see aggression start to develop in early teens, in males sometimes, because they don't know what to do with those feelings if they don't understand. And I think when we talk about transitions, I think that is maybe not when you're dealing with a school and you're working with social workers and you're trying to teach life skills and academics, that in the back of your mind it's not, oh yes, and they're going to hit puberty, and what am I going to do about that? It can be, I remember I went to an excellent support group meeting through the ABA Support Network. There was a speaker, Catherine Thoreau, who's a consultant. And, one of the mom's questions was like, now that he's getting older, he doesn't understand the difference between boys and girls because boys are stronger than girls. And he's still trying to roughhouse with girls like he used to, like either his age or his smaller than him, like he doesn't understand the difference, that he's bigger and stronger. And those things can be taught. I can give an example with my son is he's always loved to wrestle. But unfortunately, when he was 200 pounds, he wanted to wrestle with his 74-year-old grandma. He doesn't, not understanding the differences. And his consultant, I'll give an example, put an excellent program together because he uses picture communication where there's a board in his house with pictures of all the people you're allowed to wrestle with. And then there's a board with the, like the non-smoking sign that goes through it, of all the people you're not allowed to wrestle with. So if he gets a little out of hand, they just show him and they remind him. See, on the non-list. Oh, and it's been taught. But some of these, it's skill-based and it's proactive. And I've known families who've had to get a sex therapist involved or counseling. And even as parents, I think the parents that I know find it difficult talking to their typical children about sex. So again, it's one of these things that you've got to get out and sort of outfit yourself for and wonder, what will my child be like when they hit puberty? Having worked with a lot of kids and worked with teenagers, I can tell you that there will be a change. I don't know what it will be.
Is that something that personal?
But as my son going to elementary school, he would do unique little things like touching the teacher's feet because they were sitting on the floor, story time, and they thought that was all cute and all this stuff. Things like that. Bringing up the skills of these people who are supposed to be professional, like teachers or school workers, they don't seem to understand that what's cute when they're little and they leave it go on and on, it follows them as adults. And it's bloody hard to break. And that's my biggest problem.
It's cute that he gets arrested at 19.
Yeah. It's not cute. Let it go.
I had a consultant say something to me years ago, when my son was very small, that he said the focus of his teaching, of his, we call it, in his case, an ABA program or his education of any kind, he said the number one focus of your program should be to make him likable. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, teach him all the skills you can, as many as you can, to make him likable, because you want to, he said, you don't know what your outcome's going to be. He said, and if he's going to be living in care the rest of his life, try and make him the resident that everybody likes to look after, because he's getting conscious, he's got a lot of challenges coming. So, like you're saying, it's not likable to run around grabbing people's feet when you're, and I think that I've always carried that with me in my mind when I look at why am I doing something? Why are we fighting so hard to teach this, or what are we doing, or why is it, it is important. I always used to tease my husband because when he called the golden years when our kids were little because they only listened to the music that he liked. And then we entered what we called the Spice World, where my oldest daughter started listening to Spice Girls. And he was like, make her stop that. We have the skills. We can do ABA. We can do behaviorism. I said, but it's morally bankrupt and we're not doing it. Right? So why are you teaching something is important? Right? It's not important to develop some sort of system to teach my daughter. Eventually it did wear off and we're not in the spice world anymore. But
Well, I just find it difficult because you teach them personal space and everything like this, and then you go to these programs and stuff, and people are hugging and stuff like this, and so you're telling people you can't hug just anybody like that. You get he sees other people hugging all the time. It's just not consistent, and it's been so frustrating understanding that social rules. As an adult man now, it's very difficult.
But that's a really good point, because really teaching around sexuality starts when they're preschoolers.
And the women are the worst.
And yeah.
Like they're motherly. Get over it.
And, I understand what you're saying. We have this thing called privacy circles where we try and work on that. And you're right, today, I look at my typically developing son and all of his friends hug everybody all the time. So that is a hard one. But I found that to help people understand, the touching the feet. We had the thing where my son would go and hold his grade 8 teacher's hand on the PE field, right? And the teacher, trying to be supportive, would say, it's okay, I don't mind. And we would say, that's very lovely. Is there any other grade 8 boy on this field holding your hand? No, so you are helping him to stick out as disabled, right? And they understood it that way. Or walking down the street and he would take a hand of a stranger going by. And the person would say, that's okay. And I say, well, you're a stranger. And we tell my son that, I appreciate that your openness. We tell my son that, can you touch a stranger? No. We have to have these kind of black line things. So I know it's frustrating, but that's how we always explain to people. If someone you didn't know came up and hugged you, how would you feel about that? Or how are you contributing to the fact that that 18-year-old girl over there, he's going to go hug her and she's not going to be impressed? It's a conversation all the time, and it is frustrating.
Oh, it's constant conversation.
Yeah, because they don't have to judge.
But it's a support group. You keep telling them, and he's likable. He's likable.
Yeah. And shake his hand. High five, baby. Fist pump. Don't hug him.
It's just frustrating, and it's other parents are the same. Yeah.
When your child is finally gets to that transition and applies when they're turning 19, how long is that process? I've heard for some people it's a long time, for others it's very straightforward. For others, they send it in and it's sent back. And so on average, what is it for a typical family? In present day, I know before those were, but on average.
It's really hard for me to answer that because there's a couple of different things going on. I think about what someone said earlier when they started doing transition planning around 17 and someone said to them, well, you should have started this when they were 15. What we've outlined in both the cross-ministry protocol and also in CLBC policy is it is ideal to start early, and the reason it's ideal to start early is sometimes people won't have the right documentation that's required to confirm eligibility for CLBC purposes. What we've outlined as the ideal, and there's lots of variation from this, but the ideal is to begin the process of engaging with CLBC for the first time after your son or daughter has turned 16. So it's in the year in which they're 16. Best case scenario, because sometimes you won't have the kind of assessment documentation that's required. So then it gives time to be identifying where's the funding resource to get that assessment completed. Most of the assessment documents that we see at CLBC have actually been completed within the school system as part of their overall assessments. And sometimes they don't include the kind of information or language that we require for confirming that someone is eligible. And so we have a couple of different things that we sometimes need to do. We sometimes need to go back to the original assessor to get confirmation. Sometimes assessment documents will actually say things like, this assessment needs to be repeated in the future or is only valid for a period of time. When assessments say things like that, then we have to say we can't use that assessment for our eligibility purposes, so an assessment will need to be redone. And there can be wait times to get assessments done. So that's why we say it's ideal to start early. It gives people to go back and forth and get the required documentation. Particularly for the Personalized Supports Initiative, it can be a little bit more complicated because one of our requirements for that is documentation confirming that someone doesn't meet our intellectual disability criteria. And because the Personalized Supports Initiative program is so new in BC, even working with the qualified practitioners, the psychologists and the school psychologists who are providing the documentation that we are reviewing in most circumstances, lots of them it is new to. So we're working with them in sort of an educational process to make sure they're providing the information in the way that we need it. So confirming the eligibility is the first step, and we say ideally that should start fairly early. If it doesn't, you just, at the point at which you know that's the path you're going on, it still may take time, but it can sometimes make the timelines a little bit tighter. CLBC, when we first meet with people who we know will be accessing services in the future, we do go through a process of collecting information, both about the types and level of support needs that people have. And we collect that information. And we also collect information about how immediately they will need the service. Because there are some people who, when they turn 19, are able to move on to adult life and are accessing a range of other supports. Some people are going into the post-secondary system, into some of the existing options, so they're not going to need day supports immediately. There are other people who've had a high level of support as a youth. Sometimes they're living in residential support, and on their 19th birthday they're going to need support immediately because the day after they turn 19 the supports that were in place won't be in place. So we have to collect information about that to learn about who's going to need something immediately, and depending on that level of immediacy of need, we start to do targeted planning for when services can be made available. We also walk people through the range of ways that we provide service, because we do provide some services through individualized funding, and some families come to us with some experience and understanding of that. Other families want to learn a lot more about it and need more time to develop an understanding of what their role would be, what it might look like to become an employer, and those kinds of things before they make decisions about how they're going to be accessing service. So there's a range of different things that people need to learn about. That's why we recommend starting the process early. So what we outline in policy, and I brought an information sheet here on youth in transition that talks about sort of 3 steps in planning, or 3 steps in the transition process. So the first one is that eligibility piece after the 16th birthday. We say that after the 17th birthday, that's the best timing to learn about CLBC supports and services and the processes. And then after the 18th birthday, closer to the 19th birthday, is where you're really looking at detailed planning for what's going to happen next.
That's my situation, and we've done all that. It's psychiatry systems thing, everybody's done their thing. It's sent off, started in January, we just got all the information in March. That's how long it took, appointments, etc. So now it's off. So March, so are we looking at another 3 months?
So if CLBC has all of the information, and all of the information that the facilitator requires to confirm eligibility, and if they don't have all of the information they require, they should be getting back to you and being explicit about what they don't have. And when they do have that information, my understanding from our field staff is that they are able to turn that around fairly quickly. It's usually, and again, it'll depend on how old the person is. So if someone is actually over 19, they will expedite that piece of work to get on with the next steps. If someone is well before their 18th or 17th birthday, they will turn that around, and I encourage you to give them a call when you
hard to get through, it's really hard.
Yeah.
I don't
So,
know.
And I'd be happy to talk to you individually when we're done at the end and make sure that you got the right contact information and know who to talk to and how to make sure that that is done, because ideally it should be moving along.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question to do with the support services. So once a family has actually qualified and they decide that they're going to take the route of securing the services through agencies, how is it that a particular agency is selected over another agency, given what CLBC knows is the requirements for that family?
So when I talked about there are some processes that families sometimes need to learn about. There's also a couple of different things that are considered when it comes to selecting service providers. Usually the staff in the office that you're working with will suggest or recommend a service provider who has demonstrated that they are able to provide services. So we have two different provincial service providers lists. One where the service providers are providing services for people with developmental disabilities. The other one where people are providing services for the Personalized Supports Initiative. But as I mentioned before, it is a fairly new area for us. We're 3 years into delivering the services in this area, 4 now. And we know that we might need to learn a little bit more about what the service providers know or don't know. We also know from some recent research that we did with the Personalized Supports Initiative that there's a huge need for us to ensure our staff and our service providers have access to some specialized learning for people who have autism and ASD diagnoses. So we're working on that so that hopefully we can improve people's experience.
I'm pleased to hear that.
Are there any other questions or comments?
What the service providers from the RAS list